When John Joseph asked me to share my story for your Pride service and told me I had 5 minutes, I thought, wow, that's plenty of time. So I'm just going to really share part of my story about my journey as the first transgender minister in the United Church of Canada. Being the first transgender minister, the first anything, can be lonely and isolating, and that's also true for the transgender experience in general. We're outcast from society, often from our families and friends. And although I had supportive family and friends, I found it difficult in building transgender community and being part of transgender community. And this is something that's been talked about often by trans people, the difficulties of forming a transgender community. We don't have the usual braids or threads to build community. We don't have a common language or a common food or common customs or common stories or common ancestry. And of course, as Christians who read a 2,000-year-old book every Sunday, we know how important ancestry can be. So when I went into seminary, I wasn't particularly looking for ancestry, but it kind of came and hit me over the head when I was reading the book of Acts. And all of a sudden, there was the Ethiopian eunuch, who was a person differently gendered and differently sexed. This Ethiopian eunuch was also outcast for being Ethiopian, from a foreign country and not a citizen of Rome, not part of their country. And so here's this multiply outcast person who's accepted without question, baptized in the first water they see, and there is much rejoicing. So that I began to see myself in there, someone who was so different in a similar way to that I was different, being accepted into the community. And then I read Matthew 19:12, where it says, there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by birth. There are eunuchs who have been eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let those accept this who can. And remember, the kingdom of heaven is what Jesus was preaching about. That was his raison d'etre. That was what his ministry meant, that he discerned after coming out of the wilderness, the kingdom of heaven, and eunuchs make themselves eunuchs for the sake of that kingdom. Well, how affirming can that be? How amazing is that? And what does that actually mean? And I also saw that in Isaiah, eunuchs were told not to feel that they are a dry tree, because for eunuchs who obey the commandments and who love God and love their neighbor, there'll be rewards greater than sons and daughters. Greater than sons and daughters. What could that be? How could that be? And when we go back further into our ancestry, we see the story of Joseph, which we don't often understand as a transgender story. But when we look more closely, we see that in his role as a chief administrator for Pharaoh's empire, that is the role of a palace eunuch. And we see that Joseph, in his relationship with Potiphar's wife, that smacks of a relationship with a eunuch. And we even see that when he sold into slavery by his brothers to the Ishmaelites, who often groomed slaves as palace eunuchs. We see also that the Technicolor Dreamcoat, that Peterson Toscano says a better translation is princess robe. We hear this story and we see this queer child who becomes a powerful eunuch. And that's a story of my ancestry. And that story is important. And as we go back to understand our trans ancestry, we can see that it goes back all the way to the beginning. When in the beginning, everything was tohu vabohu, and the Ruach Elohim vibrated over the face of the deep. The Ruach Elohim, the breath of God, but not the God. Elohim is God's. It's not Yahweh or Jehovah or Adonai, it's Elohim. Elohim, it can only be whispered. This is not some old man bellowing creation into existence. This is Elohim, the plurisingular Elohim, the beyond gender Elohim. Elo is singular, Him is plural. There's a plurisingularity to the entity that participated in creation right from the beginning. And we also see that at the end of that story, when God looked over all of the creation after it was created and looked at everything and said, this is good. Not only if you're heterosexual, not only if you're cisgender, not only if you're white. Everything is good. And this is good news. Amen.